Iran's defense minister says that Russia is set to supply the country with 4 batteries of the advanced S-300 air defense missile system. Brigadier Hossein Dehghan said the missiles would be modernized before shipment to Iran. Dehghan says that Iranian and Russian authorities are scheduled to sign a contract next week. He did not mention the time of the delivery. The minister also noted that Tehran is in talks with Moscow to buy new Russian fighter jets. Dehghan stressed that Iran currently has no military cooperation with France. Touching on Iran's possible missile tests, the minister said that the military has already focused on boosting the accuracy of indigenous missiles. He also denied accusations that Iran had worked on missiles capable of delivering nuclear warheads. He said Iran's missile program is defensive. Tony Gosling is an investigative journalist joining us from Bristol to share his thoughts with us on this. Tony Gosling, many of the points that we've covered here in terms of Iran's defense posturing regarding some of these equipments is what has irked the U.S. and some Western countries, but in particular the U.S. First of all, this S-300 missile system is set to change the equation on the ground in the Middle East were Iran to receive it. Doesn't make quite much sense when Israel has nuclear weapons and Iran is surrounded by U.S. military bases who have many of their Air Force or military jets and their guns aimed at Iran.
No, you're quite right. There is a massive power imbalance in the Middle East. Israel is very much favoured by the West and the Western media in the coverage, so it's not been equitable coverage at all. And the idea that there might be some kind of power balance really frightens the West and frightens Israelis, because they've become used over the years to being the top dogs. But look, there's a much bigger thing going on here. What the West is doing with its foreign policy is actually forcing neutral countries, previously neutral countries, into alliance with Russia and China, because what they're doing is they're basically saying, well, look, if you're a small country, I mean, you know, as an example of Iraq or Libya, many countries actually fit into that category these days. We're actually going to hammer you. And so what other countries are doing, like President Assad of Syria over many years has been, you know, looking at this and saying, well, it means that actually there's no way we can be a neutral country. I'm talking also about, of course, the Eastern European countries. We're going to have to go into an alliance with either Russia or China, one of the other superpowers, in order to stand a chance against some of the covert operations and the dirty tricks and assassination squads that are infiltrated into these countries from the West. I think probably the most clear example of that now is Libya, which is anarchy and chaos, whereas actually it had been one of the most successful countries in Africa, providing a fantastic standard of living in comparison for its citizens.
And the other side of this whole issue is the fact that based on the latest stats, which I looked at a chart, showed how much the U.S. has pumped military equipment into the Middle East region through a variety of sales that is done, in particular to the Persian Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia. It's almost as if you throw a match into this area, it'll just blow up. What purpose do you think the U.S. has when it does that? And of course, Iran takes notice of that, and they need to have their missiles or their S-300 air defense missile system to thwart any possible attacks.
Well, look, it's essentially a divide and ruin strategy. So what they're doing is they're going into these countries, creating chaos and hoping that their military contractors, as happened, of course, in Iraq most spectacularly, and Afghanistan too, can go in to do the rebuilding. So they get what they call a double whammy financially. They'll get a lot of money from supplying arms and supplying mercenaries, that sort of thing, in the war when it first happens. And they'll also get a whole load more money for a handful of big defence contractors in going to rebuild the country afterwards. But look, you know, let's not be deluded by this whole business of who NATO is and who's behind this big arms, military-industrial complex arms alliance in the West, because other countries like Israel, Sweden, Austria, Ukraine are all actually more covertly actually part of the NATO gang. And you know, so although they will say, oh, well, but we're neutral, you can see from their actions that actually what they're doing is they're part of effectively what is a US-Israeli chain of command. And Britain, we here, we used to have our empire many years ago, but we've actually just simply become the 51st state of the USA. And as Duncan Campbell, the great writer in Britain, investigative journalist, said in the 1980s, we are America's unsinkable aircraft carrier. So many countries are now being co-opted along this route, and of course Britain had to cope with this in the 1960s and 1970s when, and of course now, the troops that were stationed here in World War II just simply refused to go home. So what's happening is there's no room in the modern world because of a weak and polluted Security Council at the United Nations for real independent countries, because effectively you've got to be part of one of the big world power blocks, and many small countries have now seen the writing on the wall, and I would suggest that Iran is one of those too. They realise that there's no chance for a small country on its own because the UN will not look after them. They're going to have to go in with one of the big players in global politics.
Thank you so much. Tony Gosling, investigative journalist from Bristol. Thank you.